The Galactic Council chamber rose like a living monument carved from crystal and steel, its ceiling stretching into endless heights where constellations shimmered as if the stars themselves had been captured and placed upon display. Rows upon rows of thrones lined the circular arena, each seat occupied by beings from empires older than human history, their forms vast and strange, some cloaked in armor of living metal, others wrapped in veils of light, their voices mixing into a storm of sound that echoed through the chamber walls, pulsed with a faint glow as if the structure itself breathed alive to the rhythm of their arguments and judgments. They spoke of dominion and control, their tones layered with pride, their words sharp as spears and soft as venom. They argued about borders across the stars, about ancient rivalries and the spoils of yet another conquest. And among these endless voices one name kept repeating, whispered with disdain, and sometimes with mocking laughter: humanity. The new species that had spread too far, too fast, daring to claim worlds at the edge of mapped space, daring to dream of standing among giants. The chamber thundered with the deep roar of the YRRK. Dominion, their ambassador pounding clawed fists upon his stone throne, demanding that the humans be placed under guardianship, that their weapons be stripped, that their leaders bow before those who had mastered the stars. Before humans had even lit their first fire, the Krillian delegates hissed their agreement, long serpentine bodies coiling around the edges of their platforms, while others nodded their colossal heads in quiet consent. The humans were reckless, they said. The humans were dangerous, they said. The humans were children. And yet at the very center of the chamber, upon a lone platform of pale light, stood one figure wrapped in the dark uniform of Earth's fledgling diplomatic corps. He was small compared to the towering forms around him, his shoulders narrow, his height barely reaching the knees of some delegates, yet he did not shrink from their gaze. He stood as if carved from stone, eyes steady, jaw firm, hands clasped calmly before him. His heart thundered, but his posture betrayed no fear. The air thickened around him as countless alien eyes fixed upon his frame, dissecting him like a specimen, a curiosity, a trespasser. Among Titans, whispers spread through the crowd. Voices low murmured doubts and dismissals. This human will bow, they said. He will kneel, he will beg for mercy. He will offer Earth's resources in exchange for survival. That is the way of the weak, that is the way of the desperate. That is the way of a species not yet tempered by the endless wars of the cosmos. Still he did not speak, he listened, his silence stretched like a blade waiting to be drawn. His stillness unsettled the oldest of the council, who expected trembling, who expected pleading. Instead the humans stood unmoving as empires older than mountains hurled insults across the chamber. And though the council had gathered to decide the fate of Earth, none of them realized that fate would not be decided by their words, but by the voice of the quiet man who had yet to speak. At the center of the Galactic Council chamber, the human diplomat stood alone upon the pale platform of light, his figure a fragile shadow compared to the towering forms that surrounded him. His uniform was simple dark fabric, marked only by the crest of Earth stitched upon his chest, yet it carried the weight of every voice that could not be heard. The billions who waited far away, unaware of how this single moment would shape their destiny. His boots pressed into the glowing surface, as if to anchor him against the storm of voices that swirled around the chamber. The alien delegates continued their arguments, their voices crashing against one another like waves on stone. They spoke in tones of superiority, some booming like thunder, some whispering like venom, all of them carrying the weight of ancient civilizations that had conquered countless worlds. They spoke of how humanity had spread too far too quickly. They accused humanity of arrogance, of daring to claim stars without permission, of daring to build fleets that could one day rival their own. They debated among themselves whether humanity should be enslaved, broken, scattered, or absorbed into their empires. The human diplomat listened without flinching, his heart beat with the slow rhythm of resolve. His gaze wandered across the faces and forms of those who sat above him. He saw eyes glowing with fire, tentacles curling in agitation, wings twitching with impatience. He saw beings of unimaginable age and power, who believed themselves untouchable. Yet what he saw most of all was fear hidden beneath their words. They did not argue because humans were weak. They argued because humans were rising. Every whisper of mockery, every sneer of arrogance, every declaration that humans must be controlled, reeked of desperation. The diplomat knew it. He could hear it in their voices like cracks beneath the surface of stone. And though the delegates roared as if they were masters of all creation, he could feel the truth pressing against them. They feared what humanity might become. The diplomat straightened his shoulders, his breath filled his chest and steadied his spirit. His silence spoke louder than any plea for peace. His stillness was a storm waiting to break. The delegates noticed now. Their arguments slowed, their voices faltered as their gazes shifted one by one toward the lone human, who had yet to answer, who had yet to bend, who had yet to show weakness. The chamber grew quieter with each passing heartbeat. The thunder of words gave way to murmurs, and the murmurs gave way to silence, until only the faint hum of the living crystal walls remained. And in that silence the weight of the moment fell upon every throne, every delegate, every empire gathered. Within the chamber, the human diplomat lifted his head, and the fire in his eyes caught the starlight above him. He had heard enough, he had seen enough, he had carried enough, and now it was his turn to speak. The whispers spread across the chamber, as if carried on invisible winds. They rippled from one throne to another, from one delegate to the next, until the entire hall vibrated with the murmur of voices. Each alien tongue repeated the same thought. Humans were fragile, humans were reckless, humans were unworthy of standing among the ancients. They said the species of Earth had no place in the grand design of the cosmos. They called humanity a child at play. In a battlefield of titans, they believed, no human could speak without trembling in fear. The human diplomat stood still at the heart of this storm. His hands remained clasped behind his back, his shoulders squared, his gaze unflinching. He was smaller than the smallest of them, weaker than the weakest of them, and yet he did not bend. His silence stretched on until it unsettled even those who had mocked him most. Their eyes narrowed, their antennae twitched, their tails curled in unease, for they could not understand how such a fragile creature could show no fear. The Krillian ambassador, a serpentine being with scales like molten silver, slithered forward and hissed, "You are but flesh that breaks with the slightest wound. You are but dust that scatters with the smallest wind. And yet you think to stand here as equal." The chamber echoed with laughter, deep, booming tones from giants with stone hides, sharp clicks from insectoid mouths, piercing shrieks from avian throats. Their laughter was cruel, but it was also nervous, for though they mocked, they could not dismiss the fire behind the human's steady gaze. The human diplomat let the sound wash over him. His heart thundered, but his breath remained steady. His mind recalled the faces of his people far away on Earth, the workers in the fields, the builders in the cities, the children who played without knowing that their fate was being decided in this chamber. He thought of the soldiers who trained without rest, the scientists who pushed against the limits of knowledge, the dreamers who looked at the stars not with fear but with longing. He thought of all of them, and in that thought he found the strength to endure the storm. Whispers changed again. Some spoke of ending the meeting quickly, of dismissing the human as irrelevant. Others demanded punishment for his silence, calling it insolence. Still others leaned forward, intrigued, though they would never admit it, wondering what words the small figure might unleash. If given the chance, the chamber became a web of doubt, pride, and curiosity, all focused on one man who had not yet spoken. The diplomat raised his chin slightly, and the motion alone silenced a dozen voices. It was not power that moved them. It was not authority. It was something older and deeper, the sense that history itself was about to shift. That feeling rippled outward until even the oldest empires ceased their laughter and leaned forward to listen. The chamber was no longer a place of debate. It was a stage waiting for a voice, a storm waiting for lightning, and in that stillness the human diplomat opened his mouth, prepared to speak words that would burn across the stars. The voices of the alien leaders rose again, now sharper, louder, and edged with arrogance. The council chamber shook with the weight of their proclamations, as if the walls themselves recoiled from their certainty. The Yerk Dominion thundered first, its ambassador, a hulking beast, plated in obsidian armor. Each word that left its jagged mouth carried the echo of conquest. He declared that humanity had no right to expand among the stars, that Earth should submit its fleets, dismantled its armies, scattered its resources, divided among those more deserving. The Krillian envoy slithered forward, scales glinting like liquid silver under the starlight. He hissed that humans were reckless children, that their fire was dangerous and must be extinguished. Before it spread further, he demanded that Earth be bound under Krillian supervision, every planet stripped of weapons, every leader placed under alien control. His long body coiled tightly around the edge of his throne, his eyes gleaming with hunger. As though he already tasted the spoils from another throne, came the voice of the Veiled Dominion. Their figure cloaked in shadows, their form shifting with each breath. They spoke with a voice like silk yet filled with venom. They insisted that humanity be made a client species, its people enslaved, its culture erased, its future dictated by those who truly understood the balance of the cosmos. The chamber trembled as their words sank into the minds of others, whispers rising like waves of agreement. Human Diplomat stood still upon his platform. He heard each demand, each threat, each dismissal, and still he did not flinch. The delegates expected outrage or denial. They expected trembling pleas for mercy, but the human gave them none. His silence became heavier than their voices. His gaze cut through their arrogance like a knife. The more they spoke, the more they revealed their own fear. For behind their threats lay the truth. They did not see humanity as weak, they saw humanity as right. Council chamber roared with overlapping voices. One demanded subjugation, another demanded disarmament, a third demanded immediate surrender. Their words collided in a storm of greed and fear, each voice louder than the last, until the hall became chaos. The air thickened with tension, with the scent of pride and desperation, and still the human diplomat waited. The ancient beings had forgotten their own silence. They had forgotten that while they shouted among themselves, the humans stood unmoved and unbroken. Their arrogance blinded them to the weight of the moment. They saw only a fragile creature before them when, in truth, they faced a storm that was waiting to be unleashed. At last the noise began to falter, the voices grew tired, the shouts diminished into murmurs once again. All eyes turned toward the center, where the human diplomat stood bathed in the pale glow of the council floor. The delegates leaned forward, their forms massive, their eyes burning, their claws and tendrils twitching. They expected surrender, they expected capitulation, they expected fear, but the human raised his head, and for the first time, the fire in his eyes burned bright enough to shake even the oldest empires. His silence had ended, and his voice was about to break the galaxy. The human diplomat stepped forward into the pale glow of the council floor, and the silence that followed pressed heavy upon every throne. Every eye turned toward him, some filled with mockery, some with disdain, and some with a flicker of unease. He raised his head, his breath steady, his shoulders unshaken. His voice, when it came, did not thunder like the Yerk, did not hiss like the Krillian, did not coil like the Veil. Instead it cut through the air, sharp and clear. Steady and resolute, he declared that humanity would never kneel. He declared that Earth would not submit, not to the Dominion, not to the serpents, not to the shadows, nor to any empire that dared imagine itself master of his people. He spoke with no stammer, no pause, no hesitation, and though his voice was not loud, the chamber heard it, as if it echoed from the stars themselves. The delegates shifted upon their thrones, their bodies, restless claws, tapping wings, twitching eyes, narrowing. Some scoffed, others sneered, a few laughed with disbelief, yet none could ignore the conviction in his words. The diplomat pressed on, his voice like steel forged in fire. He spoke of the will of his people. He spoke of farmers who toiled upon the soil of earth with hands scarred but unbroken. He spoke of builders who raised cities from dust, of dreamers who turned their gaze to the stars, of soldiers who trained not for conquest but for survival. Each word carried the weight of billions. The diplomat declared that humanity had been underestimated, that every threat hurled against them only sharpened their resolve. He told them that Earth had survived plague, famine, war, and fire, yet still endured and rose stronger. He told them that if the council demanded war, then war would come, and humanity would not break. Humanity would fight, humanity would endure, humanity would rise. The chamber trembled with the sound of his defiance. The alien delegates stared at him with disbelief. Some spat curses in languages as old as stars, others hissed that his words were madness. A few leaned back in their thrones, silent, watching, as though measuring the shape of this unexpected storm. The Krillian envoy lashed his tail against the stone floor, declaring that humans would be crushed within a single cycle. The Yerk ambassador bared jagged fangs, proclaiming that Earth would be reduced to ash. The Veil only laughed softly, their shifting form rippling with amusement. But through all their noise, the diplomat stood tall. His voice did not falter, his eyes did not waver. He told them that humanity did not seek domination, but neither would it bow. That the council could bring its fleets, its armies, its fire, but they would find themselves facing not just soldiers but every man, woman, and child who called Earth home. He promised that humanity would fight until the stars themselves turned cold before surrendering. When his final words fell into silence, the council chamber no longer roared. It sat frozen, held by the weight of one human voice, a voice that carried the strength of a world. The moment the last words of the human diplomat faded into silence, the council chamber erupted into a storm of chaos. The air trembled with the force of voices, ancient and terrible thrones shook under the weight of furious motions, claws slammed against armrests, wings unfurled with agitation, tendrils lashed against the air, as if to strike an unseen foe. The delegates who had expected fear now faced defiance, and their pride burned hotter than any of the Yerk. Ambassador rose first, his enormous form towering like a mountain of obsidian plates. His jagged teeth clashed together as he roared that humanity would be erased, that the diplomat would be taken in chains, back to Earth, as proof of the futility of resistance. His bellow shook the chamber and made the floor quake beneath the human's boots. Yet still the diplomat did not move. The Krillian envoy hissed in reply, coils twisting tighter around his throne. He spat venom across the floor, demanding the immediate invasion of Earth. He spoke of fleets already waiting in the void, ready to strike, ready to crush human cities before the sun could rise again. His eyes burned with hunger, his tail rattling with impatience, as if he could already hear the screams of surrender. The veil, cloaked in endless shadows, only laughed. Their voice slithered across the chamber, smooth as silk, yet filled with poison. They called a human bold, they called him brave, but they promised he had doomed his people. They said that the galaxy was a predator's arena, and humanity had chosen to walk into its jaws. They leaned forward, shifting shapes flickering between forms, as if the diplomat's defiance had only entertained them further. Other empires shouted their outrage, their voices overlapped in a torrent of rage and disbelief. Some demanded the human be silenced immediately, others demanded his execution. A few argued for patience, wishing to study humanity more carefully before striking. Yet the noise was overwhelming, an avalanche of voices, a storm of fury breaking upon the single figure at the center of the chamber. But amidst that storm there were cracks. Some delegates who had scoffed now sat in silence, their gazes fixed upon the diplomat as though re-evaluating what humanity truly was. Some whispered quietly to their aides, hiding their unease in the folds of their robes. Some who had ruled for thousands of years felt a weight upon their chests, a strange, unfamiliar sensation they had long forgotten. They felt doubt. Human diplomat remained still. He did not flinch, he did not retreat. His eyes moved slowly across the chamber, meeting gaze after gaze, until even the loudest voices faltered for a heartbeat. He did not need to shout, he did not need to roar. His silence was a weapon, and he wielded it with precision. The more they raged, the more he stood firm, the more they realized he had not spoken as a desperate plea but as a truth carved in steel. The storm of voices crashed on, yet beneath it ran a current. The subtle shift of fear that none dared admit aloud. For the first time in ages, the mighty empires faced a people who would not bow, and that knowledge lingered in the silence between their shouts. The fury of the council began to wane, not because their anger had lessened, but because their voices cracked under the weight of the silence that followed each word of the human diplomat. The great chamber, that had always belonged to the ancients, now felt strangely smaller, as though the walls leaned inward, pressing upon them with invisible force. The human did not rise in size, did not glow with power, did not change at all, yet the perception of him shifted, as if the delegates were now seeing not a fragile creature but the spark of something far more dangerous. The Yerk ambassador growled again, his obsidian-plated body trembling with rage, yet when his words left his jagged maw they no longer shook the chamber as before. Instead they carried an undertone of unease, a subtle crack in the armor of confidence. His threats sounded more like warnings, his roars like attempts to convince himself of victory rather than declarations of certainty. The Krillian envoy hissed loudly, coils tightening around the stone of his throne. His tail whipped against the floor with frustration, but his eyes betrayed him. They flickered with caution where only hunger had been. Moments before, he had seen predators rise in the wild of his homeworld. He knew the signs of prey becoming something more. He did not yet speak it aloud, but in his heart he recognized that the fire burning in the human diplomat was not that of prey. The veil remained amused, shadows flickering across their shifting form. But beneath the silk of their laughter there was hesitation. They had lived long enough to know when history bent upon a single moment. They had seen empires fall not from strength but from arrogance. They smiled with their ever-changing faces, yet they leaned back upon their throne, as though measuring distance, as though calculating survival. Other delegates who had once shouted loudly now sat in silence. They shifted uncomfortably, their tendrils tapping their robes, their claws scratching at stone. Their eyes refused to meet one another, for each of them felt the same thought rising unspoken: humanity might truly fight, humanity might truly endure. Humanity might truly endure. humanity might truly rise. The notion was absurd, impossible, insulting, and yet it rooted itself deeper in their minds with every heartbeat. The human diplomat did not need to speak again. His earlier words lingered like smoke, heavy in their lungs. His presence filled the chamber, not by size or strength, but by certainty. He believed in his people, and that belief made the vast empires feel fragile before him. For the first time in countless cycles, the ancient rulers realized they were staring into the eyes of a species that had nothing to lose and everything to fight for. Silence stretched longer than before, not broken by shouts or roars. The sound of the council chamber became the sound of breath, measured and uneasy. The alien leaders who had mocked humanity now shifted in their seats, as if the floor beneath them no longer felt solid. The weight of the human declaration pressed upon them like gravity that could not be escaped, and in that silence, every empire present felt the faint cold edge of fear for a species they had dismissed as weak. The chamber remained steeped in silence, the echoes of defiance still drifting like thunder through the air. The human diplomat did not waver, his gaze steady, his stance unbroken. He raised one hand slowly, not as a gesture of surrender but as a sign of finality. The movement was simple, yet it drew the attention of every throne in the vast hall, as if the ancient beings sensed that something irreversible was about to be spoken. His voice rose once more, not louder than before, but heavier, as though carried by the gravity of a world. He declared that humanity would stand together, that no empire would find them divided, that every star, every colony, every home would rise as one. He swore that if the council sought to test the will of his people, they would discover a fury unlike any they had ever known. He told them that war would not be humanity's end but its beginning, a crucible that would forge them into something the galaxy had never faced. The Yerk ambassador growled low, a sound more cautious than enraged. His armored plates rattled with unease as he leaned back into his throne. For the first time, he did not meet the human's gaze directly. His threats felt smaller, now hollow things compared to the certainty that hung in the chamber. The Krillian envoy coiled tighter but did not speak. His tail twitched nervously, his eyes darting to other delegates, searching for support, searching for reassurance. The hunger that had once burned in him dimmed, replaced with calculation. He knew predators when he saw them, and the human before him was no longer Protha. Vale leaned forward, their form flickering between shadow and light. Amusement painted across their shifting face, yet beneath that smile was interest. Their laughter this time was quieter, almost respectful. They spoke a single line that echoed across the chamber, that perhaps the council had made a mistake in underestimating this fragile world called Earth. Other delegates whispered to their aides, some in anger, some in fear, some in reluctant admiration. Their voices carried uncertainty, a sound the chamber had not heard in countless cycles. The unity of arrogance that had always bound them together was beginning to fracture, and the human diplomat saw it. He saw the cracks widening like fault lines across the council floor. He pressed further, not with threats, but with promises. He vowed that humanity would never seek conquest, but would never forgive those who sought to enslave them. He vowed that every act of aggression would be repaid, not with submission, but with resistance. He told them that the age of treating Earth as a fragile ember had ended, and that now they would burn like a flame, unyielding against the void. The chamber trembled. With the weight of his words, the silence returned once again, but this silence was not born of arrogance or disbelief. It was born of fear and respect, of realization that a new force had stepped into the galactic arena and would not be moved. Human diplomat lowered his hand, his gaze sweeping across the council one final time. He saw the fear in their eyes, the doubt in their postures, the shift in their silence, and he knew then that humanity's place among the stars had been claimed, not with chains, not with submission, but with defiance. The chamber stood still as the words of the human diplomat lingered like fire upon the air. The delegates who had once laughed now sat in silence, their mighty thrones seeming smaller than they had ever felt. The human lowered his gaze only for a moment, then turned and began to walk away from the center of the council floor. His steps echoed across the stone, every sound ringing like a drumbeat of defiance. His figure seemed small against the towering walls, yet in that moment he carried the weight of an entire world upon his shoulders. Not a single delegate moved to stop him. The Yerk who had threatened to chain him sat frozen, his claws gripping the edges of his throne, as if afraid that to rise would make him appear weak. The Krillian coiled tightly around his seat, watching with narrowed eyes but refusing to act. The veil flickered with restless shadows, their smile faint, their silence louder than their words. Every eye followed him as he walked, every mind struggling to comprehend that a species once dismissed as fragile had stood before them, unshaken. Heavy doors of the council chamber opened with a low groan as the humans stepped beyond their reach. The light of distant stars streamed into the hall, casting his figure in silver glow. He did not look back, for he had no need. His words had already carved themselves into the stone of the chamber, into the hearts of those who had listened. His departure left behind not emptiness, but a pressure that clung to every throne, reminding the empires that the galaxy had changed forever. The silence that followed his exit was longer than any before. It stretched heavy and endless, until finally voices began to rise. Some were filled with rage, demanding immediate retaliation. Others called for restraint, their tones uneasy, uncertain. A few spoke quietly, urging that humanity should be watched more closely, that perhaps the council should not rush into battle against a people so willing to fight. The once united roar of supremacy had become a fractured chorus of doubt and fear. The Yerk ambassador eventually slammed a claw against his throne, demanding war, yet his roar no longer carried the same power. The Krillian envoy hissed for fleets to be unleashed, yet his tail twitched with unease. The veil whispered that time would reveal the truth, that perhaps war would not go as the council expected. The chamber fractured, further alliances, strained suspicion growing thicker than smoke far beyond the chamber. The message of defiance began to spread through the stars. News traveled fast, carried by whispers, by transmissions, by trembling voices that had witnessed the impossible. The story of a human standing unbroken before the great council echoed across distant worlds, stirring questions in the hearts of countless beings. For the first time, many began to wonder if the dominion of the ancients was truly unshakable upon earth. The diplomat returned to his people, his face worn, yet his eyes still fierce. He told them the council had been warned, that the galaxy now knew the will of humanity, and as his words spread across cities, across colonies, across outposts, among the stars, the people of earth rose as one. They prepared, not with fear but with resolve. The time for war had come, and humanity would face it not as prey, not as subjects, but as equals standing unbroken among the stars.